Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. And today, on our very special afternoon episode, I'm very happy to have with us Prano Bailey Bond, writer and director of the great new movie Censor. Prano, thank you so much for being here with us. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is my pleasure to have you here with us, and we have so much to talk about. First of all, I want to say you have such a cool name. Prano
Thank
Bailey Bond. That is just such a cool name. Anyway, with that out of the way, Censor. Okay, let's just go right into Censor. We have so much to talk about with this movie. It's been advertised here in the United States for several months. I've
Mhm.
been reading about it to my viewers. I've been showing them trailers. We've been watching them at the same time. Finally got released and I watched it. I loved it. Now the premise of Censor, the movie takes place in the 1980s. Okay,
Yeah.
now in the 1980s I was 6 to 16. That was my decade right there. So I was still pretty young. Now the movie really touches upon how back then uh, the media was really attacking the horror genre for a lot of real world bad stuff that people were doing. They were blaming movies, basically.
Yeah.
Now, as the writer of this film, uh, was that really how it went down in the United Kingdom? Did you exaggerate it a little bit? How much research did you do into that?
No exaggeration whatsoever. In fact, there's more bonkers, crazy stuff that happened that kind of needs to be in a documentary because if it's in a fiction, you just think it's made up. The headlines and the tabloid like newspapers were going for horror. They were basically saying that VHS horror was the reason for all the terrible things that were happening in the world. And there were headlines like taken over by something evil from the TV set with these like illustrations of kids watching TV with these like goat demons coming out of the TV to like grab the children. There was this amazing headline which was called Pony Maniac Strikes Again.
Oh man.
And it was only a tiny little article, but it was about an attack on ponies in a rural part of England. And the police statement for this act of violence on ponies was that the attacker was probably affected by either video nasties or the full moon. And you're like, okay, so not only is it video nasties that are making people do these things, but also now the police believe that the moon has supernatural powers. So it was just this really insane time. And obviously, I was really young. So I'm looking back at that time, remembering little snippets, but mostly I've been kind of looking back as an adult and, you know, knowing the environment and kind of Thatcher's Britain that I
Yeah.
grew up in. You really see that VHS horror became a really easy scapegoat for, decisions that politicians were making
Yeah.
that were, making life not as good for society.
It was.
Um,
I'm sorry. I was just
and
going
I-
to say it was easier for the media to blame movies, the full moon, rather than the real scary truth that evil lies within people.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like I said, I was pretty young back in the '80s as well. My brother, who's over 9 years older than me, I asked him after watching Censor, "Do you remember anything like this happening in the United States?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah." He didn't, here. The movies that were displayed in Censor, your movie, is what here in the United States we would call like the B type horror movies in the
Yeah.
80s, where they were just going for as much gore, guts, and blood as they possibly could. In your research, was the United Kingdom like the forefront of the media problem? Did it spill over a lot into the United States as well?
It feels like this specific thing around video nasty it was very much a UK thing. The United Kingdom had one of the most conservative reactions, in the Western world to these films, and that's the thing that's really bizarre about it. I mean, I've heard people over in the States compare it to the Satanic Panic.
Yeah.
And that there are maybe equivalents with like rock music and things like that over there. But I
and
don't
now video
think
games too.
exactly, yeah. And in the 50s, it was comic books that were
Yeah.
going to turn little boys into monsters, And but it's really mad that there was just this little pocket of time for the UK where this reaction happened, and it's kind of off the back of, you've got to remember that VHS was a new form of technology, and there was this real fear around how this like ability to watch films in our own homes, rewind and rewatch things over and over again. Those were the things the censors were concerned about. Obviously, also the fact that anyone could get their hands on these films in the home.
Yeah.
But it's quite crazy when you think about it now. I mean, all those films have been remade, not all of them, obviously, but the ones that people kind of really remember and celebrate. They've been remade, things like The Evil Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Cannibal Holocaust, I Spit on Your Grave.
Oh, yeah.
And now we have, we're being sold the freedom to watch what we want when we want now. And it's just flipped so much. So I just find it really interesting that we have these little moments in history where we're just so scared of what a new form of technology is going to do to us. Like we think that, we're like one bit of technology away from just snapping and our like inner dark side being unleashed.
Yeah.
And how scared we are of ourselves in a way. It's really interesting.
A lot of people don't realize that the United Kingdom and the United States have two completely different rating systems for when it comes to films. Like here we have the R rating, the PG-13. In today's world, what is the equivalent of an R rating in the United Kingdom?
I think it would be an 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they do it by age.
I've got badges from the BBFC. 1 second, I'm going to get them. Hang
Okay.
on. Hopefully I won't destroy my little
No,
setup.
I'd love to see that.
Okay. So the BBFC sent me a little gift bag. So I have these, which are the ratings here. So
wow.
These are badges.
Yeah.
So you've got U certificate, PG, so parental guidance, 12A, 12, and 15 and 18. So I guess 18 is probably your R, I would have thought.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I thought one for every occasion.
That is so cool. I never seen that before, so thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go back to the movie. The story, the film, fell on the character of Enid on her shoulders. And Niamh, did I pronounce her name correct?
Yeah, it's Neve. It's an Irish name.
Neve did a brilliant job of carrying this movie from a woman who took her job very seriously as a censor, and then we find out she has suffered a past trauma. And what I loved what you did in both writing and directing this and bringing it to life is how you blended this rational woman in the beginning, and slowly as the film progressed, you saw film, reality, her job meld into one. In the writing part, was that very difficult for you to do?
It was definitely, I think writing is one of the most difficult parts of filmmaking, because you're doing so much research and you've got so many ideas, and then you're trying to make those into a story that, keeps all the bits that you need and says things in the way you want them to and has a meaning. So I definitely found the writing part, for me anyway, is always one of the most challenging parts. I guess I always sort of broke down the film into worlds. So I imagined her reality as, Thatcher's Britain, grey, oppressive, bleak. We often see the 80s as like this very hyper pop version where it's like big ghetto blasters and shoulder pads and things. But that's not the 80s that I see when I look at pictures of my childhood and real life in the UK. It was kind of much more, I don't know, drudgy and dowdy
Yeah.
than all that, you know? So I kind of broke it into, so you've got her reality and then you have her memories, which are very unreliable as memories are, her dreams and the worlds of the video nasties. And I kind of, I guess, built those worlds even as I was writing. You've kind of picturing them, and I am quite visual and audial when I write. I write in lots of detail about sound and image. But you're kind of building those worlds and sort of imagining how they're going to weave together, like you described. So that's certainly something that you're putting together in the script, but also the idea is inherently doing that as well, because it's about somebody who has a gap in their memory and they're filling that gap with fiction. It was really fun. Like, now I can look back on the writing process and think it was really fun, because it's the kind of thing where you make those little discoveries as you go and things click together, and they're amazing moments. But obviously in between all that, you're sitting at your desk going, quite a lot.
So the writing is done. Now you're behind the camera, directing the set. Principal photography has started. First of all, let me ask you this question. Was the casting process for Enid, did it take a long time for you to find the person that you wanted to represent Enid?
I think I saw about 70 actresses for Enid, so quite a lot. I met some amazing women, you know. It was really incredible, because you start to go, wow, there's so many amazing actresses out there. But Neve came in and read for the part, and I'd seen her in a show over here. It's a TV series called The Virtues, and I'd already met her as well before that. We were on this kind of Screen International cohort thing called the Screen Stars of Tomorrow. So I'd met her there, saw her in The Virtues, and was like, wow, I mean, she's nothing like Enid in The Virtues at all. But she's incredible in that. And I was like, okay, this is a really interesting actress. I knew when I was writing the script that I would have to find somebody who could carry the film, because she's in every single scene, ultimately, except for when she's a child. So this actor is going to have to be somebody that will keep our attention, but not just that. Enid's quite a closed character, so how can we find someone who's going to let us in to that? And when Neve came in and read, she has this ability to put thought on screen, and that's what I needed, because Enid's so closed as a character. I needed somebody who was going to bring an empathy to the role as well, and that's what Neve does for all her roles. But she had this kind of coiled spring version of Enid at the beginning, and then she has so much range that she was able to sort of take us to the other extreme of the end of the film. So she did both of those in the auditions, and I was really excited to like have the opportunity to work with her. So yeah, it was a very exciting casting. But I saw quite a few people in the process.
So when you casted Neve and you're like, okay, this is going to be my Enid, I would assume that you two spent a lot of one-on-one time letting her know your vision of how you want the character of Enid. And she probably had a lot of questions herself about what you wanted. Did you guys find yourselves spending a lot of one-on-one time going back and forth, explaining the role?
Yeah, 100%. We cast Neve maybe a couple of months before we shot. So we had this buffer period where maybe it wasn't even that much, but it felt like we had a good chunk of time. But Neve was actually working in Cape Town. So we did everything via Skype. The majority of our conversations were on Skype. So we'd like jump on Skype every weekend. And in the week, I would have been sending her essays and newspaper headlines and films and all kinds of things to look at and research. And then at the weekend, we'd talk about those things. We'd talk about Enid. You're basically trying to transfer all the ideas and thoughts you've had when you've been writing the script into the actor's head, but then also leave enough space for them to bring their ideas as well and make sure that those ideas work with the story that you're telling. But I think it's important that you're leaving room for the actor to take
Yeah.
ownership of the character, basically. So
You don't want to suffocate them.
exactly, yeah. And it was such a lovely collaboration with Neve. I remember dreaming before before casting the role, thinking I just really hope I meet somebody who I end up being, it's not like you're looking for a friend, but you kind of want to go through this experience that's, is going to be really intense. You're going to have to work with that person in really intense situations. And like I say, they're in every single scene. So you're just hoping it's someone you get along with. And we got along brilliantly, and we've stayed very good friends.
She was absolutely brilliant. And like I said, that's why I focused on the casting question, because that must have been a hard job for you, because you knew that the success or failure of this film depended on you putting that right person in that role. Yeah. And she just was fantastic and just absolutely wonderful. Before we proceed, Censor got released here in the United States like in July. Did it?
Yeah, June 11th. Yeah.
June 11th. Did it get released at the same time in the United Kingdom, or did it get released earlier there?
No, it's just been released here. So it was released in cinemas on August the 20th.
In the United Kingdom.
In the United Kingdom, I've just been doing like a UK Q&A tour. So that finished on Saturday. Okay. So and we go on to VOD in a couple of weeks, I think, over here. So yeah, it's still in cinemas here now.
That's awesome. In the United States, I believe it just went straight to video on demand. Am I correct?
It had a week in theaters over there, so it did have a small theatrical release, and then it went to VOD. Yeah.
Okay. Now, for all our audience members who have not watched this movie yet, it's called Censor, and it's available on any your digital streaming retailer of choice, Amazon, Vudu. Please watch this movie. It's amazing. What kind of reaction have you been getting from the Q&A sessions you've been doing on your tour throughout the United Kingdom? Are you, as we discussed in our messages prior to this, are you getting a lot of people who want to get your take on different parts of the movie and what they represented? I told you, I mentioned to you in our message before this interview that I love the fact that you did not hand it over to us on a silver platter, and that you left a lot open for viewer interpretation. The people that I have spoken to here in the United States, fans, even team members of mine, they're like, I'm really confused about this, and this. And the best that I can do is I can offer them, I mean, I think I got it. But as talking to different people, I'm like, wait a minute. I have my interpretation. Okay. And I think everybody else is going to have their interpretation. So going back to the question, are you getting a lot of fans approaching you saying, hey, what was this about? What did you really mean by this? What's the Q&A like?
The Q&As have been brilliant, and the reaction's been really great. I've had, I guess there's been like questions that have leaned towards like, so what really happened to Nina? That kind of thing. And there's also been a podcast over here called The Final Girls, and they've done 3 episodes so far called Censor This. And it's, I think the first one, they have a film writer, like a journalist, come on, and she's like, I had my version so worked out, and I knew exactly what it was in my head, and I was totally convinced. And then I came out of the cinema and spoke to a friend, and they'd had the complete opposite and were completely convinced the other way. And so I think that's really interesting, because for me, the film needs to be left slightly ambiguous in terms of, elements that Enid is never going to know, Mm-hmm. So it's more interesting for me to stay authentic and truthful to Enid's point of view. And that's always what I intended. I think the point is that the things she never knows, we should never know. And those are the things that have driven her to this point. That is ultimately the horror of the film, is the not knowing. And it's far more interesting for people to come away and have conversations about what they read than for me to,
To explain it to
give it
them.
to explain it and give
Yeah.
it all to them. I think that's where it's interesting to me that people can have these arguments. And I'm trying to not say things too clearly because I know some people won't
Yeah.
have watched the film who are watching this, so I'm trying to
Oh,
not,
I know exactly what you
but
mean.
yeah.
And the bottom line is, this movie is going to spark interesting discussions amongst people in regards to the ending. At which point did Enid really start losing touch? When did she get really sucked into her job? What I loved about the ending is those split-second flashes. Okay, we're not going to go into detail. We're not going to spoil it. But those split-second flashes, it reminded me of another movie that came out recently, and that is Saint Maud. Have you
Okay.
seen Saint Maud?
Yeah, I'm friends with the director of
Rose
Saint Maud.
Glass.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Saint Maud, another great film. You don't actually get to see reality literally until the last split second before the credits roll. Okay,
Yeah.
if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. And seeing the ending of Censor sort of reminded me of that, where those split second flashback, well, they're not flashbacks, but those flashes
Yeah.
that we see as Enid gets the ending that she wants in life and what she's been hoping for since the trauma she suffered as a little child. That was very brilliantly done. Uh, when it came to the directing part, okay, and even afterwards, post production, when because you are also an editor. I don't know if you played a part in editing this, but were you in the editing room with the editors working out that last 5 minutes and how you wanted it to be shown on the screen?
Yeah, I mean, you plan everything in advance in terms of like something like that moment. The moments you're describing are very carefully shot in order to be able to achieve that in the edit. Because um, if you break down what you're seeing, the actors are in exactly the same place, in the same location, but we've taken, some of the dressing out of the background. We've changed their clothes. Then, there's the post-production side, but on set, you're keeping everything as accurate as possible. You need the shot to be locked off. So it's really carefully, precisely shot in order to get the results you need in the edit. So you're planning that in advance of even shooting it. And then I worked with a really great editor called Mark Towns, who also edited Saint Maud, funnily enough.
That's right.
However, I hadn't seen Saint Maud until last October. So after we'd locked picture on
Yeah.
Censor, because it didn't come out here in the cinema until the end of last year. And I could see why people might draw that comparison, even though they're very different endings in lots of other ways, but there's a similar technique being used there. But it's interesting because obviously we both made our films quite separately. So yeah, then in the edit room, I mean, essentially the editor is assembling the film as you're shooting. So with that end sequence, I remember seeing that for the first time assembled, and it was quite funny actually because my editor Mark had received the rushes for the scenes, and he hadn't been sent the sound for some reason. So he thought we just hadn't shot sound, and I think I'd suggested to use the Blank Mass track that's on there. It's called Chernobyl, and he put that on, and it's really immersive, and it makes you feel like you're kind of in this sort of strange floaty bubble. And then Enid was just miming the dialogue, and I came away and I was like, I love that. I love that you left the sound out. And he said, oh, well, nobody sent me the sound. I thought you didn't shoot sound. And I said, no, we shot sound, because I remembered very clearly, and it was there. It was just, it hadn't been sent over properly. But I was like, let's leave it with no dialogue. Let's keep her miming, because it felt more like she was in this sort of strange fantasy bubble. So there's like little happy accidents that happen like that. But Mark put that sequence together in the edit, and we did work on it more together. But it was one of the sequences that I remember it didn't change a huge amount. Like there's some scenes that you know, the editor will assemble that scene and you kind of keep needing to like work on it and change it, and you're trying to find the right way around. Whereas that scene was one of the scenes that didn't have loads of fiddling done to it.
Yeah.
It just felt quite, you know, and I like it when that happens, like that you kind of find the way it's supposed to be quite early on. That makes it feel like, you know, as a director, you've kind of done a good job of that scene, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now being an editor, and I think that is a great advantage when someone is directing. A lot of directors don't really understand the process of editing. Some do, some really don't. They know how to go in the editing room and post and work with the editors. But you being an editor and being behind the camera, how much of a boost and a leg up do you think that gives you, just knowing how it's going to be put together afterwards?
I think it's really helpful because when you're planning how you're going to shoot a scene, you can be quite clear in your head how you're going to cut it together. So it means that you're not wasting time getting shots that you don't think you're going to need. So it means that I'll go into a scene hopefully being more efficient, because there's never enough time to shoot all the things you want. So knowing that, you know, this is how you want the scene to play out, even if that does change. Like it might be that you get on set and you can't do something, or you find a better way, and then it may be that you send that over to the editor and they do something that you didn't expect, that, you know, you're really excited by. Things transform, but at least you're going in with quite a clear plan. And I definitely think that having a background in editing makes me feel more confident in that sense. Like if you need to drop something or combine two shots, you kind of know how it's going to cut. But also my background has been, you know, a lot in factual editing, so documentary, and in documentary editing, you're finding the story a lot of the time in the edit. So there's an element of being a writer with pictures when you're, I think, editing factual. So it's got that storytelling training as well as the kind of on-set, like nuts and bolts of putting a scene together training. So I always say, if, you know, any young filmmaker, I'm like, learn to edit. Even if you want to be a DOP, if you want to shoot and be a cinematographer, I think if you know how to edit, you're going to shoot stuff that just comes together more beautifully, I think.
And just staying on this editor thing just for a little bit longer, there are so many kids out there, teenagers, who have access to technology that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago, and they come out with these amazing edits and they send them to me. And I'm like, wow, you got real talent. And if you ever want a career in this industry, just the skills that you have now will give you such a boost and a leg up, whether you decide to go to film school after high school or whatever. It's a real big boost. Now, going back to Enid, I want to, because the movie is up to interpretation, and I believe a lot of it is, even you as the writer, you probably just have your opinion of what happens to Enid. I want to hear your opinion on this. Do you think Enid was over that cliff's edge from the very beginning of the film, and she was just really good at concealing it for the first half of the film? Or do you believe there was a trigger when she saw that one film that pushed her over the cliff?
So good question. It's something we talked about a lot in the development process. I always saw her as fairly over the cliff from the start. And one of the conversations that we'd have a lot in development with the executives were conversations around like, how broken is she at the beginning, and allowing her to have somewhere to go. Because I always saw her as being quite cracked right from the start, that this is somebody who's basically like holding their life together in the only way that they know how, but also in a way hasn't really ever lived. You know, she's not really got a social life. You know, she's lived her life in guilt. You know, she's afraid of letting people in because she believes that deep down she's a terrible person and that she's rotten inside. and if people get too close, they might work that out as well. So she's kind of concealing a lot at the beginning, and I see this as a film about self-censorship, and as well as censorship in art and film. It's about a person who's censoring who they are and who they think they are, and because of that, they have this very difficult relationship with maybe the darker side of themselves, which you see in the scene where she meets Frederick North for the first time, and he says, something about you need to get in touch with the dark side of yourself, and she says there is.
I love that scene. I love that scene in the woods.
I think that's the at the heart of the film really is this is a person who will not acknowledge that they have a dark side, and we all have a dark side, and the more we pretend that that doesn't exist, and the same way you can do with horror and with society and all the bad things, actually the worse it's going to get. We have to kind of acknowledge these things and deal with them, and that's the healthy way, in my opinion. And I think it's why repression is such a great subject for horror, because horror is like the return of the repressed. It's the thing that's going to basically boil up and become more and more twisted the more you fight it, and eventually it's going to turn into a monster and it's going to eat you. The thing that you don't want to face in yourself or you don't want to face in the world, it'll come and get you in the end.
Now, is Enid's profession just something that she just fell into, or is it still her trying to, she hasn't given up on her family and searching. Do you think her profession as a censor is her way of not stop looking and continuing to look to see if she will find that thing that she's been missing? Or do you think it's just a job that she just landed because of, whatever, skills and whatnot? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, she does say in the film that I do this to protect people. And so I always saw her as using censorship as a way to make up for what she didn't do for her sister, which was she didn't protect her sisters. Exactly. So she's taking on the responsibility of protecting everyone from the horror in fiction. But we did talk a lot about, what other jobs she might have done. So, for example, in her backstory, one of the other jobs we always imagined her doing was like a playground health and safety officer. And like that she went, we even had at one point that she went to schools, because the censors during this period, actually, it was a part-time job. But we didn't feel it fitted in the film in the end. But, we had these kind of scenes very early on in the script where she'd go to schools and be talking to young people, and kind of we'd get a sense of like her previous life as a health and safety inspector, and she's kind of constantly trying to make everything safe and protect everybody. So that was really the reason for her, her coming to this job.
Now, a big turning point in the movie for me, what I call Enid's point of no return, is when she visits the home of that horror filmmaker, okay? She goes in, she even recognizes, she's a censor, she recognizes parts of his house that have been used in his movies. Then it goes really south. And her lack of emotion, when that happens, I think that's when Enid's point of no return it happened. There's no going back for her. She's completely flipped over. One of the greatest scenes in the movie as well, and how that just went completely south. Now, the way it played out in that sequence, it was an accident. He was attacking her. She was trying to protect herself. And like I said, things went south. Is that how you originally wanted that scene to play out? Did you wrestle with how you wanted that very pivotal scene to go? Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, it was always intended like that it's a sorry accident, ultimately. But it is, like you say, it definitely is a turning point for her and a point of no return, because what's happening in that moment is what she's watching on screen day in, day out is now in the real world. And so that's also echoed, like you say, in the fact that she finds herself in a set of one of the films she's watched at work. And so it was all about, like, I guess the echo of the fiction kind of echoing into reality.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels like ages ago since I wrote that scene, or since me and my co-writer Anthony Fletcher would have been writing that scene. The thing I remember the most about writing those scenes is how much fun it was to write Doug Smart, the character, because he's just so
I'll tell you, let me describe it, and then I want to hear your...
Yeah, you go for it.
He came across as one of these sleazy porn filmmakers.
Yeah.
That's my description.
Yeah, 100%. And there's something about writing characters that are kind of unashamedly awful.
Yeah.
But also he does have this sort of vulnerability in a way, because he's got an ego, you know, and his ego can be bruised, and that makes him dangerous.
Yeah.
And so that kind of character is really, really fun to write. So it was weird, because I felt like he just somehow like rolled off the tongue. Is that the right way when you're writing? But you know, I don't know. I have like an inner sleazy porn filmmaker in me or something that, like, it just came out very naturally.
Do you think what was his character's name? Doug, right?
Doug Smart. Yeah.
And Frederick, do you think they saw behind the facade that Enid was putting up, like when Doug first meets her at the office? You think him, and then of course Frederick later on in the woods, they saw through that facade of this, that, like I said, she was putting up, of trying to protect people, and saw the dark nature inside her?
I don't think they do. The funny thing with directing those scenes is you're in Enid's head, you know, so you need to make the scenes work for Enid's perspective. But actually, the other characters, they're maybe not even intending what she's interpreting in the way that she's interpreting it, you know. So Doug sees her as a pretty thing. Yeah. You know, he's probably seen her name in the papers because of what's happened with the amnesiac killer.
He's a pure misogynist.
Yeah, exactly. And Frederick is a, you know, egotistical director who's thoroughly bored by these actresses who keep turning up, you know. So there's always another perspective, but the challenge on set with, you know, directing the other actor in the scene was always that you need to make it truthful for that character, you know, but also we're in Enid's head. So we need to be hearing it how Enid hears it. But I also wanted it to feel like it could work if we were in their version of the scene as well.
Yeah. Now, in the towards the middle end, and towards the beginning of the third act, or middle of the third act, the best way to describe Enid is sort of what in real life would be a stalker fan, a person who doesn't differentiate an actor's character from the actor doing the job. And that happens a lot. It happens to people today, where they do a job and their character does something that the audience doesn't like, and the actor receives death threats, which is ridiculous. But that's the kind of personality and persona that Enid takes on. And it's very weird because she works in the industry where she knows better. But that rational side of her brain completely shuts down, okay? Just completely disappears. Was there, like, going back to that word again, wrestling on how you were going to bring that to the screen, how you were going to portray? Wait a minute. How is this person whose job is to look at these films, know that they're fake? There's discussions in the movie when they're in the break room and they're talking about the guts they just saw in the scene and sausages. So, I mean, these people obviously know the difference. When did that break? How do you explain that break?
But even in that opening scene, her colleague is saying to her, you know, no one's going to think this is a documentary, Enid, it's so fake. One of the first lines that's delivered to her, she's taking it very seriously, even at that point. So Enid's got an obsession, and her obsession is also her Achilles heel, which is her sister and the tragedy and the need to make up for whatever went wrong, you know, back then. and that is her blinkered, that she's completely blinkered to everything else. So I had this like visual theme as well through the film of her kind of traveling down dark corridors and alleyways, and this idea that this is a woman who's becoming more and more enclosed in the way she thinks, the way she sees the world, and what she wants to get, like what her goal is, that she's kind of traveling down these dark corridors to a much darker and darker place, and there's no other alternative route. So all of that was about somebody, even the aspect ratio shift was me kind of thinking about that sort of single-minded, blinkered woman, kind of just focused on one thing, and everything else is going out the window. And that's her trauma ultimately that's kind of led her to this place. So so it was always an obsession, an obsession film.
Now, another wonderful thing is in the woods when she approaches Frederick, the cinematography was absolutely phenomenal. The way you showed the woods and even the light fog, it was just very scary. The atmosphere was very, very scary. I mean, who do you give credit to, or even yourself, for setting up the look and feel of the woods when she first meets Frederick and he's trying to pull that part of her, of what he thinks he's talking to another actress who's sane and normal and here to audition for a job, not realizing that this woman is, she's gone. I mean, she's lost it. How did you achieve that setting, that beautiful setting in the woods?
Well, as the director, you describe what you're going for to your director of photography, cinematographer. So you're talking a lot with them about atmosphere, emotion, and mood. But ultimately, I can't take credit for the actual lighting. And it's me transferring those ideas to the director of photography, the DP, who then needs to have the talent to actually bring that to life. And I work with a DP called Annika Summerson, who I've known since we met actually at university. So we've been working together now for a long time. She shot most of my music videos and my short films. So we've worked together loads. And I agree. I think she did such an incredible job on that scene, on the whole film, but that scene in particular, because lighting a forest is not easy, especially when we're not a massive budget film, obviously. So, I was describing the smoke, and you're always hoping with smoke that you're not going to have a windy day or a windy night, because you can just have all that just blow away. And so even the special effects guys who are doing the smoke, did such a great job, because they have to kind of really think about exactly where their smoke points are and where the wind is, and if that's going to change, because you could just go, okay, and action, and then suddenly all the smoke is gone. And that's happened before, and it's incredibly frustrating. But yeah, it's a combination of everybody making the film, really. It's also the sound design and the music that's holding you, atmospherically there. So we have a really beautiful piece of music. Well, it's dark and beautiful. At that point, from our composer, Emily Lavinise Farouche, who did this wonderful score that's very vocal, like lots of strange vocal sounds that she's processed and turned into like deep, dark noises, strange lullabies. And then also, I remember saying to my sound designer, I wanted the sound of like weird men's voices that we could hear just off camera, like somewhere deep in the woods, that there's something threatening. And I think we had trouble recording some men's voices for that. And at one point there was somebody suggested, oh, should we just put foxes? And I was like, no, it has to be men's voices, because that's got what's going to make her feel more scared in that forest. But it's really a combination of all the departments that you see. Even things like the way the sleeves looked on the nightie and in the costume, like just it's all of those people coming together and doing their jobs really well. So
what do you think about the irony in the film where you have this person, a censor, whose job is to protect the public from seeing really graphic stuff, actually be the one, and probably the only one, that is influenced by what she is watching to make her commit these atrocious acts and completely not be fazed by them. Because uh, when going to that scene in the woods and then into the cabin, and she starts seeing what she's been seeing on screen for real, she doesn't seem phased at all. Do you
Mm.
see the irony there as someone as a censor trying to protect the public, but it's her that's
Yeah.
gotten influenced by the films that she's been watching.
Yeah, and I mean the problem there is that Enid loses the ability to tell the difference between fact and fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and that's, I guess, I remember hearing a David Cronenberg quote that was something like, "The censor who's driven to protect is the most dangerous censor of all," and
Yeah.
he also said something along the lines of like, "It's the censors who seem to have stopped being able to tell the difference between fact and fiction," and I love those little quotes that you kind of hold on to as you're writing a project like this, because that's the problem, is the people that can't tell the difference between fact and fiction generally weren't the horror fans.
Yeah.
Like me as a kid, I loved watching horror because I knew it wasn't real. Like the things that scare you are the things that you think are real, you know. But even as a kid, you can tell the difference between
Mm-hmm.
reality and fantasy. And when it's a fantasy film and it's like a spooky ghost story or something, it's like, woohoo, this is like fun scared. I can enjoy this. But I think during this particular period, there were a lot of people who couldn't tell the difference between fiction and reality.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was where the problem lied. So, yeah.
So, in the time that we have left, let's hear, how did you get your start in this industry? You just told us you've been a fan of film for a long time. When did you realize that this is what you wanted to do as a career?
Quite young, actually. I mean, I was always watching films, loved films. I had like my mum was an actress, like in her kind of
Mm-hmm.
younger years. And she was an acting teacher, and so she had like a DV camera that she'd film her students with, and I'd borrow it, and like me and my friends would like make films and stuff like that. But I kind of thought at that point I wanted to act. And then it wasn't until I went and did a performing arts course and I got the opportunity to direct that I realized that actually it was shaping something from the outside that I was really excited by, because it fused my passion for performance, storytelling, and art. I was really into painting weird pictures and stuff. And then, I was much more interested. That was a theatre course, but I really wanted to make films because I wanted to be able to control point of view. And so really from there, which would have been about 16, 17, I kind of decided I want to make films and, tell stories through films. And I didn't really differentiate between directing and editing at that point. It was like I was just doing everything because I didn't have anybody else to make, films with.
Exactly, exactly. When you're starting
Yeah,
out, you got to you got to wear a lot of hats.
yeah.
What was your first directorial debut film? Like you would say your first like professionally accredited directorial debut.
I mean, I made loads of short films. Like I made my first short when I was 17, again, just me with my friends and stuff. And then I made short films through university, and then, I don't know if short films count because they're not,
No,
I
they
mean, you're
do. They're very
credited.
popular.
Well, in that case, I guess, yeah, it would probably be where I was working with a crew would have been a short that I made probably like 2006, 2007.
Okay.
And that was called The House of Virgins. And it was about a God-fearing old lady who has to look after a small boy, and she thinks he's a sinner, and she ends up basically killing him and eating his heart.
Yeah.
So that was lovely. So that was probably the first thing I did with a crew. But then I guess in terms of like, professional being paid would have been the music videos that I started to make. So
Now,
um,
after school, did you go through like the university route, or you're like, you know what? I want to learn on the job. I want to get myself on sets and learn how it's done.
I went and I was a runner at like a post-production company, then went to university and did a practical film degree. And then I went back to running at like post houses, and through post post-production and working on animations as well. I ended up editing, but the whole time was making my short films. So I was always like kind of one foot in the industry at that point, and then making my own shorts. And then I went off and worked as an editor for a while. And then I ended up, after doing that, I ended up deciding to do jobs that meant I had as much freedom and time as I could find, so I could focus on like making stuff. So that meant stepping away from the industry slightly, because any industry job means that you're working all the time in that role. So, you know, I kind of balanced that by like going and doing random jobs. Like I think I had a weekend job in a pub and stuff like that. So you've got a bit of money coming in, but you can always drop things and go and shoot something or get a job working on set and learn something. So it's a bit of a mixture.
Now, when it came to Censor, was the whole thing planned out? Like when you started production, did you have like distribution already in place, or did you guys go through the film festivals? How did you end up, you know, going from production to distribution? Did you have to go through the film festival circuit?
Yeah, so we had a sales agent, Protagonist Pictures. We had them on board at script stage, so before we shot the film. And then the film world premiered at Sundance this year.
Nice.
And that was where we got most of our distribution deals. So Magnolia in the US, and then MGM bought the film for most of the rest of the world. So in the UK, we're with Vertigo releasing and MGM partnering. So that all happened kind of off the back of Sundance, and we went to Berlin Film Festival. And it's really weird because this year's been so different, you know, like in terms of festivals being virtual, not being able to go. So right now we've just had our UK release, and then next weekend I'm going to my first film festival abroad in France because I haven't been able to travel to any. So it's like, it's kind of all back to front, but you know, it's fine. It's all good. Like, I'm just happy that
the industry is finding its way on how to. We're still in COVID. We're not, you know, we were all hoping we'd be done with it by now, but we're not. We're still in the middle of COVID and everything. A lot of stuff is still being done virtually, but to be shown at Sundance and, you know, to get picked up, congratulations on that. That's awesome. Moving forward in your career, it sounds like directing, just from listening, is your number one passion, with writing very close behind.
Yeah, I kind of write in order to direct the things that I want to direct. Writing is I enjoy it. I do like being kind of thoughtful and quiet, and like having that period. It's quite schizophrenic writing directing, because you kind of stay in on your own to write, and you lock yourself in a room, and obviously I co-write, so we work on Skype quite a lot as well. And then you do the directing bit, and you're like, you know, managing a whole crew and cast, and then doing lots of public facing stuff. So after this, you know, period, I'm going to be going back into hibernation and writing, but I've got loads of ideas that I'm really excited about. So I am looking forward to the writing now.
Are they all horror related?
They're all very dark, definitely.
Stay with that. Stay with that.
Yeah. There's one that's definitely a horror, one that's maybe a dark comedy, another one that's like, oh, I don't know, horrible, but I don't know if it's a horror. But yeah.
Oh, Prano, we are out of time. This has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you.
I'm looking forward. I want our audience, because here in the United States, we're in the middle of the afternoon. A lot of people are working. A lot of people are going to watch this as it gets archived and see this interview. So, guys, please, if you haven't watched it yet, watch Censor. It's available on Amazon, here in the United States at least, Vudu, Amazon Prime, Google Play. It's everywhere, okay? You won't be disappointed. You'll love the film. Prano Bailey Bond here wrote it, directed. Did you have any part in producing?
No, it was produced by Helen Jones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so please check it out. Any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before we go?
Please check it out. Yes. Exactly what you said. You've already said it. Check it out. Hope you
please
enjoy it.
Watch Censor. It's an amazing film, especially if you watched Saint Maud and you loved Saint Maud. They're both like, I don't want to say one's better than the other, but they're like right here. I mean, they're both amazing. So
Yeah,
thank
cool.
you so much, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you again tomorrow. I want to thank Prano for being our guest. And everyone stay safe. And remember, always stay walking. Have a good one. Bye bye.